Not every attack begins with shouting. Some of the most dangerous moments arrive in silence, when no one wants to look and no one wants to get involved. That night, in a dim parking garage in Norfolk, a widowed mother was only trying to take her young son home safely. But 3 men stopped them, not to steal money, but to force her to sign something meant to bury the truth forever. No one stepped in, until a low growl broke the silence, and everything changed. The parking garage beneath the Norfolk apartment complex always felt colder at night, even in summer. The air carried a damp metallic smell that clung to the skin, and the fluorescent lights flickered as if they were tired of doing their job. Sarah Miller walked carefully, one hand gripping her purse, the other wrapped tightly around her son's small fingers. 8-year-old Evan tried to match her pace, his sneakers echoing too loudly in the empty space. She had worked late again, the kind of late that came from needing every extra dollar, not from ambition. Since her husband's funeral, nights had become longer, heavier, filled with routines meant to keep grief from spilling over. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Down the stairs, into the car. Home. Halfway across the garage, Sarah noticed a sedan parked too close to her SUV. At first, it was just an inconvenience, the kind that made you sigh and adjust your path. Then she felt it, that subtle tightening in her chest, the instinct she had learned to trust after years of being married to a man who lived by instincts. "Mom," Evan whispered, "why are we stopping?" "I just dropped my keys," she said quickly, kneeling as the metal clattered across the concrete. Her hands shook as she gathered them. The sound seemed to carry farther than it should have. Footsteps answered. They were slow, unhurried, 3 sets. Sarah straightened and turned. 3 men stood between her and the exit ramp, spread just wide enough to block it without looking obvious. They weren't shouting. They weren't rushing. One leaned against a pillar, another rocked on his heels, and the third, a tall man with a thin smile, looked directly at her as if he'd been waiting. "Well," he said calmly, "there you are, Sarah." Her breath caught. Evan pressed closer to her side. "You've got the wrong person," Sarah replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. "We're just going home." The man tilted his head. "Sarah Miller, Apartment 3B, widow of Thomas Miller." He paused, letting the name land. U.S. Navy. Evan's fingers tightened painfully around hers. "How do you know my name?" she asked. Another man lifted his phone, angling the camera toward them. The red recording light blinked on. "Just a little insurance," he muttered. Sarah stepped back instinctively, her shoulder brushing the cold concrete pillar behind her. There was nowhere else to go. The elevator doors were closed. The stairwell was shut on the other side of them. "We don't want trouble," the tall man continued, his tone almost friendly. "This doesn't have to be messy. We just need you to sign something." He produced a folded document and held it out, not close enough to grab, but close enough to see. Evan glanced at it, then up at his mother's face. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thin, "I don't like this." Sarah lowered her head slightly, so only Evan could hear. "Stay behind me, no matter what." She looked past the men, searching for movement, for anyone. A security guard stood near the far wall, half hidden by shadows. For a moment, their eyes met. Relief surged in her chest. Then the guard looked away. The tall man followed her gaze and smiled. "See? No one wants to get involved." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Hope flared, then died when she saw the screen. No signal. "You think you can scare us?" she said, more to convince herself than them. "My son is here." "That's exactly why you'll cooperate," the man replied softly. Evan's breathing quickened. He stared at the ground, then suddenly looked up, his eyes scanning the garage with strange intensity. "Mom," he said quietly, "it's really quiet." Sarah listened. He was right. No cars, no voices, Just the hum of lights and the distant drip of water. Too quiet. She wrapped her arm around him, holding him close as fear settled deep in her bones. She had faced grief. She had faced loneliness. But this corner of concrete and shadow, felt like something else entirely. And somewhere beyond the circle of flickering light, unseen and unheard, the night seemed to be holding its breath. Sarah didn't move. She couldn't. The pillar at her back felt like it had grown teeth, and the space in front of her had narrowed into a doorway made of men. The tall one kept smiling as if he were greeting a neighbor, not trapping a woman and her child in a concrete basement. "Sarah Miller," he repeated, almost gently. "You know, most people don't appreciate how predictable grief makes a person. Same roots, same times, same habits." Evan's hand was still in hers, but his fingers had gone stiff, like he was trying to disappear into her palm. Sarah shifted her body so he stayed behind her hip, tucked into the safest spot she had. "What do you want?" she asked. The man glanced at the phone in his partner's hand. The camera lens pointed at them like an eye that didn't blink. He was filming Evan's face now, slowly, as if collecting proof that the boy existed. "We want you to sign," the tall man said. "That's it." He unfolded the paper with care, smoothing it against his own chest so it stayed out of Sarah's reach. The page looked official in the worst way. Dense lines, bold headers, boxes for initials. Sarah tried to focus on the words, but her mind kept snagging on the sound of her husband's name. Thomas Miller, U.S. Navy, spoken by a stranger like it was a tool. "I'm not signing anything," she said, her voice low. "You can leave us alone." One of the other men, shorter and thicker through the shoulders, laughed under his breath. It wasn't loud, just mean. "She thinks she's got options." The tall man's smile thinned. "You do have options. You can sign and go home, or you can make this complicated." Evan's breathing hitched. Sarah felt it, that small panic rising in him like a wave. "Mom?" he whispered, barely audible. "They know Dad." Sarah swallowed. "Hush, sweetheart," she murmured, keeping her eyes on the men. "Just stay close." The tall man heard him anyway. He stepped a little nearer, and Sarah's spine tightened. "Your boy's smart," he said. "Yeah, we know about Thomas. We know about the funeral, the flag, the whole proud little ceremony." Sarah's throat went dry. The funeral had been one of the few moments that still felt unreal, like a movie she'd been forced to watch. The uniforms, the folded flag pressed into her hands, Evan clinging to her coat, confused by the tears. "How do you know that?" she demanded. The man ignored the question. "We're not here to talk about the past. We're here because certain things were left unfinished." He lifted the paper higher. "This just clears it up." "What is it?" Sarah asked. "A release," he said, as if that explained everything. "A simple agreement. You sign and you won't be bothered again." Sarah stared at the blocks of text, and a cold realization crept in. Releases were for lawsuits, for claims, for money. "You're trying to take something," she said quietly. The man shrugged. "We're trying to prevent trouble. Trouble has a way of following people who don't cooperate." The one filming stepped closer. The phone camera tilted down toward Evan, who flinched and pressed his face into Sarah's coat. "Don't film my child," Sarah snapped, her voice rising despite herself. The man filming smiled, almost bored. "Then make it quick." Sarah looked past them again, searching the shadows for movement. The security guard was still there, but now he had turned his body away, pretending to inspect a door that didn't need inspecting. A man in a cheap uniform with a cheap paycheck. Sarah understood with a bitter clarity that he had decided her safety wasn't worth his risk. The garage felt smaller. "You can't do this," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady for Evan. "This is harassment. This is—" "Stop," the tall man said, and the word landed like a slap. Listen carefully. We are not here for your feelings. We're here because you got something that isn't yours." Sarah's heart pounded. "I don't know what you're talking about." His eyes hardened for the first time. "You do." He nodded at the shorter man, who reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin envelope. He didn't open it yet. He just held it loosely, as if it were nothing. Evan lifted his face a little, his eyes glossy with fear. Sarah tightened her arm around him. The tall man leaned in just enough that Sarah could smell coffee on his breath. "You're going to sign because you're a widow, and widows need peace, and because your son deserves to sleep without waking up screaming." Sarah's anger flared, hot and protective. "Don't you dare talk about my son." "Then sign," he said softly. Sarah's mind raced. If she signed, what did she lose? If she didn't, what would they do? The one with the phone kept filming, zooming in now, capturing her face. Evan's face, the fear, the corner. Evan's voice came again, quieter, shaking. "Mom." "I don't like the quiet." Sarah listened, and her skin prickled. He was right. The garage had fallen into a heavy stillness, like the world had stepped back and turned away. Even the flickering lights seemed to pause between blinks. The tall man lifted the pen, holding it out like a final offer. Sarah stared at it, feeling the weight of every choice she didn't want to make. And then the shorter man tapped the envelope against his palm, once, twice, as if counting down. Sarah realized with a chill that sank deep into her bones that whatever was inside that envelope was meant to break her. And the men already knew it would. Sarah felt the garage closing in on her, not because the men had stepped closer, but because the rest of the world had quietly stepped back. She could sense it in the air, that subtle shift when witnesses decide they would rather not exist. The tall man waited. He was good at that. He knew pressure worked best when it had time to sink in. Sarah glanced again toward the security guard. He was still there, his yellow vest catching the light, his presence so close it almost felt like safety. Almost. He cleared his throat, turned slightly, and pretended to check a maintenance door that hadn't moved in years. That was when Sarah understood. He had already made his choice. "Please," she said, her voice cracking despite her effort. "There's a child here. You can't just—" The man filming cut her off by stepping closer. The phone lens hovered inches from Evan's face. The boy froze, his eyes wide, his breath shallow and fast. "Hey," Sarah snapped, her fear flashing into anger. "Get that thing away from him." The man smirked, but didn't move the phone. "Relax. It's just documentation." "Of what?" Sarah demanded. The tall man answered calmly, "Of you agreeing." Evan's fingers dug into her coat. Sarah bent slightly, whispering into his hair. "Look at me. Don't look at them. Just listen to my voice." But Evan wasn't looking at the men anymore. He was staring past them, toward the open space of the garage, his face pale. "Mom?" he said softly, his voice trembling. "Why isn't anyone helping?" The question struck deeper than any threat. Sarah had no answer. She thought of how often she had told Evan the world was full of good people, how his father used to say that most folks would step in if something was wrong. Standing there now, cornered under flickering lights, she felt those words crumble. The shorter man chuckled. "Kids learning early." Sarah's chest burned. "Leave him out of this." The tall man's eyes flicked to Evan, then back to Sarah. "You brought him. That's not our problem." He nodded to the man with the envelope. Slowly, deliberately, the envelope was opened. Inside were photographs. Sarah recognized them instantly. Her knees almost gave out. The photos showed her at the bank, clutching paperwork. Another showed her leaving the VA office. One captured Evan beside her, holding a small paper flag, his face tired and confused. Dates were scrawled on the backs in thick black ink. "These are private," Sarah whispered. The tall man shrugged. "Nothing's private anymore." Her mind raced. They had followed her, watched her, tracked her movements since the funeral. The thought made her skin crawl. "You got money," he continued. "Compensation, benefits, all very official, but paperwork can get complicated." "What do you want?" she asked again, her voice hollow now. "We want you to sign," he said, tapping the document, "so certain questions never get asked." The man filming lowered the phone just enough for Evan to see the photos. Evan gasped softly. "They were at the funeral," he said suddenly, his voice small but certain. "Mom, I saw them there." Sarah stared at him. "What?" Evan nodded, his eyes never leaving the pictures. They were far away, by the trees. The tall man's smile faded for the first time. Just a fraction, enough for Sarah to notice. Fear twisted into something sharper. "You followed us even then?" The man didn't answer. He didn't have to. The garage felt unbearably quiet now. Even the drip of water had stopped, or maybe Sarah just couldn't hear it anymore. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, a cruel joke. Still no signal. The security guard finally shifted, glancing back at them. For one fleeting second, Sarah thought he might step forward, that he might remember why he wore the uniform. Instead, he turned and walked toward the stairwell, his footsteps quickening as he disappeared. Evan watched him go. "He's leaving," he whispered. "Yes," Sarah said, her voice steady in a way she didn't feel. "He is." The tall man folded the photos back into the envelope and held it out, closer now. "This is your last chance to keep things simple." Sarah looked at the pen, at the paper, at her son. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure they could hear it. She felt trapped between fear and fury, between signing away something she didn't understand and risking something she couldn't bear. Evan suddenly tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking, "I remember something." She leaned down, her forehead touching his. "What, baby?" "At Dad's funeral," Evan whispered. "There was a dog, a big one. It sat really still, like it was listening." The words sent a strange chill through her. Sarah straightened slowly, scanning the garage again. The shadows felt deeper now, thicker, as if the silence itself was waiting. The tall man extended the pen one last time. "Time's up." Sarah stared at it, knowing whatever she chose next would change everything. And somewhere beyond the edge of the light, the quiet held, tense and unnatural, as if it were about to break. The pen hovered between them, a thin piece of plastic carrying more weight than it ever should have. Sarah stared at it, her vision narrowing until everything else in the garage blurred. The men, the cars, the shadows. All of it faded behind the steady rise and fall of Evan's breathing against her side. She did not reach for the pen. The tall man sighed, as if disappointed by a stubborn child. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Sarah swallowed. Her mouth was dry, her tongue heavy. "I want to see what I'm signing." The man chuckled softly. "That's not how this works." "Then I'm not signing," she said. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the men seemed to pause, recalculating. The garage felt hollow, stripped of sound, like someone had turned the volume knob all the way down. The flickering lights stuttered and steadied again, casting long, crooked shadows that clung to the walls. Evan pressed his face into her coat. She felt his fear, sharp and helpless, and it ignited something fierce inside her, a refusal she hadn't known she still possessed. The tall man's eyes hardened. He nodded once to the man with the phone. "Fine," he said. "Let's remind her what's at stake." The phone lifted again, closer this time, its lens glinting. Evan flinched. "Stop it," Sarah said, her voice rising despite herself. "You don't need to scare him." The shorter man leaned in, his voice low and unpleasant. "He's already scared." Sarah's heart pounded so hard she felt lightheaded. She wrapped both arms around Evan now, shielding him completely, her body instinctively forming a barrier. "I told you," she said through clenched teeth. "There's nothing for you to take." The tall man stepped forward, close enough that Sarah could see the faint lines around his eyes. "Your husband knew better. He didn't stop when he should have." The words hit like a blow. "What does that mean?" Sarah demanded. He smiled again, thin and knowing. "It means you're cleaning up after him." Evan stirred, lifting his head slightly. "My dad was a good man," he said quietly. The tall man looked down at him. For a fraction of a second, something unreadable passed through his eyes. Then it was gone. "I'm sure you believe that," he replied. Sarah's hands trembled, but she didn't loosen her grip. Her mind raced, searching for a way out that didn't exist. The exits were blocked, the witnesses were gone. The silence pressed in from all sides, heavy and suffocating. Her phone buzzed again, a dull vibration against her hip. She didn't even check it this time. She already knew. Evan shifted, pulling back just enough to look around. His eyes moved past the men, past the parked cars, into the deeper shadows of the garage. "It's too quiet," he whispered, "even quieter than before." Sarah listened. The hum of the lights seemed distant now. The drip of water had stopped entirely. Even the echo of their own voices felt muted, swallowed before it could travel. The tall man noticed the change too. His head turned slightly, his gaze flicking toward the darker end of the garage. "What are you doing?" he snapped at his men. They glanced around, uneasy for the first time. Sarah felt it then. Not relief, not safety. Just a strange tension in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Evan's grip tightened. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a breath. "It feels like someone's here." Sarah followed his gaze. The shadows between the parked cars seemed thicker, deeper, as if the darkness itself had weight. The tall man cleared his throat, forcing confidence back into his posture. "Enough of this," he said. "Sign it, now." He thrust the pen forward again, closer than before. Sarah looked at it, then at Evan. She thought of Thomas, of the funeral, of the folded flag, of the promise she had made at his grave that she would protect their son no matter what. "I won't," she said quietly. The words felt final, solid. The tall man's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, to threaten, to escalate. But he never got the chance. From somewhere deep in the garage came a sound so low it almost wasn't a sound at all. A vibration, a warning, a presence made audible, a soft, unmistakable growl. It cut through the silence like a blade. Every head turned at once. Evan's eyes widened, not with fear, but with recognition. "Mom," he whispered, awe threading through his voice. "That's it?" The growl came again, closer this time, steady and controlled. Not wild, not angry, purposeful. The tall man took a step back without realizing it. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered against the concrete, the sharp sound echoing far too loudly in the sudden stillness. Sarah's heart leapt, caught between terror and hope as the shadows at the edge of the light began to shift. Whatever was out there had finally decided to break the silence, and nothing in the garage would be the same again. The growl didn't get louder. It didn't explode into barking or chaos. It stayed low, steady, and controlled, like a warning spoken in a language the body understood before the mind could translate it. Sarah held Evan tighter, her eyes locked on the darkness between the parked cars. She expected something fast, something violent. Instead, what emerged was calm. A man stepped into the spill of flickering light from the far side of the garage. He moved like he had all the time in the world. No rushing, no shouting, just a straight, measured walk, his shoulders squared, his gaze taking in every detail in a single sweep. He wasn't dressed like a cop. No uniform, no badge visible. He wore jeans, a plain dark jacket, and boots that made almost no sound on the concrete. But there was something about him that made the space feel different, like the air itself had stopped making excuses. The tall thug recovered first, lifting his chin as if offended by the interruption. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer right away. He looked past them, not at their faces, but at their hands, their positions, the phone camera still recording, the envelope of photos, the way Sarah was pinned to a pillar with her son tucked behind her. Then he spoke, and his voice was quiet enough that it forced everyone to listen. "Step away from them." The tall thug let out a short laugh. "You lost?" The man stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to matter, far enough to stay smart. He didn't puff his chest out. He didn't threaten. He just stood there as if he'd been waiting for this moment longer than any of them realized. Sarah's heart was hammering, but something new threaded through the fear. Not relief yet, not hope, just the sense that this stranger had walked into the same darkness and wasn't afraid of it. The shorter thug glanced behind him, uneasy now. "It's one guy," he muttered, but his voice didn't carry confidence. The man with the phone kept filming, swinging the camera toward the newcomer. "Say that again," he taunted. "Let's hear you play hero." The stranger's eyes flicked to the phone, then away. He didn't care about being recorded. That alone made the thugs hesitate, because men who care about cameras usually care about consequences. Men who don't either have nothing to lose or know exactly how to win. "Last warning," the stranger said, still calm. "Back off." The tall thug's smile returned, sharper this time. "Or what? You gonna lecture us? You got a problem, you call the police." Sarah almost laughed at the cruelty of it. Her phone had no service. The guard had walked away. The police were an idea, not a reality. The stranger's gaze shifted just briefly toward Sarah. His eyes were clear and focused. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked like someone assessing what needed to be protected. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice softened by a fraction, "keep your boy behind you. Don't move." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she could move, even if she tried. Evan peered around her hip, staring at the man. Something in Evan's face changed, like his fear had found a place to rest. The tall thug spread his hands. "You hear that? He's giving orders now." He took a step forward, and the shorter thug moved with him. It wasn't a rush. It was a test, a slow push to see if the stranger would flinch. The stranger didn't flinch. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward the shadowed row of parked cars where the growl had come from. He didn't even raise his voice. "Easy," he said. The tall thug paused. "Who you talking to?" The stranger's hand lowered toward his side, and for the first time Sarah noticed what she hadn't seen before. A leash, dark and heavy, partly hidden against his leg. Evan's eyes widened. "Mom," he whispered, and this time his voice wasn't just fear. It held something else. Memory. The thugs noticed too. The man filming zoomed in, trying to capture the leash like it was proof of a bluff. "What, you got a dog?" the tall thug scoffed. "You think a dog scares us?" The stranger finally answered the question they'd asked earlier, though not the way they wanted. "My name's Luke," he said simply. Just Luke. No last name, no bragging, no speech. He shifted his stance slightly, angling his body so he could see Sarah and the thugs at the same time. A small movement, but it spoke volumes. He was positioning himself between danger and the people who couldn't move. The tall thug's confidence wavered. "Luke what?" Luke didn't respond. He didn't owe them that. The shorter thug muttered, "This is getting stupid." Luke's eyes dropped to the ground for half a second, then lifted again. "It'll only get stupid if you make it stupid." The tall thug's face tightened. He hated being spoken to like that, like he was a child about to touch a hot stove. He snapped his fingers at the man filming. "Turn that on him. Get his face. Let's see how brave he is when he's internet famous." The camera swung up. Luke didn't blink. He didn't look away. His gaze stayed steady, and his voice stayed level. Step. Away. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Evan's breathing had slowed, but his eyes were locked on the shadows behind Luke. Then Luke gave a command so soft it was almost tender. "Rex." The name fell into the garage like a key turning in a lock. The growl came again, closer now, not louder, just nearer. A sound that made the hairs on Sarah's arms rise. The tall thug took an unconscious step back. The shorter one did the same, though he tried to hide it. "Rex?" the tall thug repeated, forcing a laugh. "You really named your dog Rex? What is this, a cartoon?" Luke's expression didn't change, but his eyes did, just slightly. They sharpened. "That dog," Luke said, "is the only reason you still have choices." Sarah felt Evan's hand clutch her coat again. She looked down and saw tears in his eyes, but not the helpless kind. The kind that came when fear started turning into something like belief. Luke's fingers tightened on the leash. "Ma'am," he said again, softer. "Stay where you are." Sarah nodded once, more, unable to speak. The men stood frozen, staring into the shadows, waiting to see if the dog was real, waiting to see if Luke was bluffing. Luke wasn't bluffing, and whatever was about to step into the light was not coming to negotiate. Rex stepped into the light without haste, as if the garage belonged to him, and he was simply deciding where to stand. He was larger than Sarah had expected, his coat dark and clean, his posture low but balanced. His ears were forward, his eyes fixed not on the men's faces, but on their hands. The leash was taut, but Rex didn't pull. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He waited. The tall thug's laughter came out thin. "That's it?" he said. "That's your big move?" Luke didn't answer. He shifted one foot back, anchoring himself, and gave a single, quiet command. "Guard." Rex moved, not fast, not slow, just enough to place himself squarely between Sarah and the three men. His body became a barrier, solid and deliberate, like a door closing without a sound. The growl deepened, not louder but fuller, vibrating through the concrete and into Sarah's chest. Evan gasped softly. The man with the phone took a step back without meaning to. The camera wobbled, the red recording light jittering across the scene. "Hey," he muttered, "keep that thing back." Rex's eyes flicked toward him, sharp and precise. The man froze. The shorter thug swallowed hard. "It's just a dog." Luke's voice cut through the air, calm as ever. "No, it's a K9. That word landed differently. The tall thug's jaw tightened. "You threatening us with a dog?" Luke's gaze never left their hands. "I'm giving you a chance." The silence stretched again, thicker now, charged. Sarah felt Evan's fingers loosen slightly, his body leaning forward despite himself. He stared at Rex with a look she hadn't seen in months. Recognition. "I remember him," Evan whispered, barely breathing the words. "Mom, he was there." Sarah's heart skipped. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "At Dad's funeral," Evan said. He sat really still, like he was watching over everyone. Luke heard that. His eyes flicked toward Evan for the briefest moment, and something unreadable passed across his face. The tall thug scoffed, trying to reclaim control. "This is ridiculous. We're not scared of—" He reached into his jacket. Everything happened at once. Luke's voice dropped, sharp and absolute. "Hands, now." Rex's body tensed, a coiled spring. His growl sharpened into a warning that needed no translation. The tall thug hesitated, his fingers closing around something cold and metallic. A knife flashed in the light. Sarah screamed. "Rex!" Luke said, and this time there was steel in the word. "Hold!" Rex did not move forward. He did not attack. He held the line, his body vibrating with control, his eyes locked on the knife. It was restraint perfected, power waiting for permission. The man with the phone panicked. "Put that away," he hissed. "This is getting bad." The tall thug's bravado crumbled into fury. "Shut up!" He raised the knife, not toward Luke, but toward Rex, testing. Rex took one step forward. That was all it took. The shorter thug stumbled back, bumping into a parked car. The phone slipped from the filmer's hand, clattering to the ground, the screen cracking as the camera continued to record from the floor. Luke's voice was low and controlled. "Drop it!" The knife wavered. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, barely audible, but real. Someone had called. Someone had finally decided to act. The tall thug's eyes darted toward the exit, then back to Rex, then to Luke. He was trapped between consequences he could see and consequences he could feel. Evan tugged at Sarah's coat. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling but steady. "The dog won't let them hurt us." Sarah swallowed hard, tears blurring her vision. She nodded, unable to speak. The tall thug snarled and made his choice. He lunged, not at Rex, but sideways, grabbing Evan's arm in a desperate, ugly move meant to buy him leverage. Sarah screamed Evan's name. Luke moved instantly. "Rex!" The command cracked like a whip. Rex launched. He didn't go for the man's throat. He went for the arm. Precision, training. Force applied exactly where it was needed. The knife clattered to the ground as the thug howled, collapsing under Rex's weight. Rex held him there, teeth locked, body braced, eyes still scanning for threats, even as he restrained his target. Luke was already moving, stepping in, securing the situation with practiced efficiency. "Stay down," he ordered the other two, who had dropped to their knees without argument. Evan was pulled back into Sarah's arms, shaking but unharmed. She clutched him, sobbing now, the sound ripping free from her chest. Rex released the thug at Luke's signal and stepped back, returning to a guard position as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The sirens grew louder. Luke knelt in front of Evan, keeping his movements slow. "You okay, buddy?" Evan nodded, wiping his eyes. "He listened to you." Luke glanced at Rex. "He always does." Rex sat calm again, his breathing steady. Evan reached out hesitantly, and Rex leaned forward, touching his nose gently to the boy's trembling hand. For the first time since the garage doors had closed behind her, Sarah felt the weight lift from her lungs. The silence had been broken, and it had broken the right way. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the concrete like a promise finally being kept. Red and blue lights spilled down the ramps, bouncing off pillars and parked cars, painting the garage in harsh, flickering color. For a moment, it felt like the end. It wasn't. Luke stayed where he was, one hand on Rex's leash, the other open and visible. He watched the three men on the ground, not with anger, but with a careful, measuring calm. Rex sat at his side, ears alert, eyes tracking every movement, as if the danger might stand up again at any second. Sarah held Evan so tightly her arms ached. His face was buried in her shoulder, his small body trembling in delayed shock. She whispered his name over and over, not to calm him, but to convince herself he was still there. Police boots thundered across the garage. Voices barked commands. The two uninjured men were cuffed without resistance, their earlier bravado drained away. The tall man lay pinned, groaning, his arm immobilized, as officers pulled Rex back just enough to secure him. "Good dog," Luke said quietly. Rex stayed seated, unblinking. An officer approached Sarah. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak yet. Evan peeked out, his eyes wide and red. "We're okay," Sarah managed. "We're okay." The officer nodded and moved on. That was when Sarah noticed the woman standing near the stairwell. She hadn't been there before, or maybe she had, and Sarah had been too afraid to see her. An older woman, gray hair pulled back, hands shaking as she held a phone in both palms. Her eyes were fixed on the men being arrested, not with satisfaction, but with a deep, exhausted resolve. "That's them," the woman said suddenly, her voice louder than she intended. "Those are the same men." An officer turned. "Ma'am?" The woman took a breath, steadying herself. "Donna Hayes. I live on the 3rd floor. I saw them follow her in. I started recording as soon as I realized what was happening." She held up her phone. The screen glowed with a frozen image of the garage, the thugs closing in, the moment before Luke stepped into the light. "I called it in, too," Donna added. "Didn't stop recording once." Something shifted among the officers. Phones were taken. Statements were requested. The scene began to change shape, turning from chaos into procedure. Sarah stared at Donna, disbelief and gratitude colliding in her chest. You stayed." Donna met her eyes. "Your husband helped me once," she said simply. "When my car broke down. He didn't hesitate. I wasn't going to hesitate tonight." Sarah's knees nearly gave out. Luke watched this exchange quietly. When Sarah finally looked at him, really looked, she saw exhaustion under his control, the kind that lived deep and didn't leave. "You didn't just show up, did you?" she asked softly. Luke hesitated. It was the first time he did. "No," he said. "I didn't." He glanced at the tall thug being lifted onto a stretcher. The man was conscious now, his eyes burning with hate and fear. When he saw Luke watching, his mouth twisted into a smile. "She doesn't even know what she's carrying," the thug rasped. "Do you?" Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What is he talking about?" Luke exhaled slowly. "We should step away." They moved a few feet. From the officers, Rex walking calmly between them, his presence grounding. Evan stayed close to Luke now, not afraid, just quiet. Luke lowered his voice. "Your husband was close to uncovering something before he died. A group that targets families of service members, pressures them, scares them, buys silence cheap." Sarah's heart pounded. "Thomas never said anything." "He wouldn't," Luke replied. "He didn't want it near you or Evan." Donna's words echoed in Sarah's head. "Your husband helped me once." "What do they want from me?" she asked. Luke's gaze dropped to her purse. "Not money. Proof." Sarah froze. Her fingers tightened around the strap. Evan looked up at her. "Mom?" "The flash drive." The world tilted. She remembered now. The night before Thomas deployed for the last time. His voice low, his eyes serious. The small metal drive he'd pressed into her hand, telling her to keep it safe, no matter what. Luke saw the recognition hit her face. "They thought tonight would scare you into giving it up." The tall thug laughed weakly from the stretcher. "Still time," he muttered. Rex's ears pricked. Luke placed a firm hand on the dog's neck. "Enough." The officers finished loading the thug into the ambulance. The garage grew quieter again, but this time it wasn't empty silence. It was the kind that followed a storm, heavy with aftermath. Sarah looked at Luke, fear and resolve battling in her eyes. "If they're this desperate, it's not over, is it?" Luke shook his head once. "No, but you're not alone anymore." Evan reached out, resting his hand on Rex's back. The dog leaned into it, solid and warm. The trap had failed, and the people who set it were finally being seen. The garage slowly returned to itself after the sirens faded. The flashing lights disappeared up the ramp, leaving behind the familiar hum of fluorescence and the smell of oil and damp concrete. It was the same place it had been before. Yet nothing about it felt the same. Sarah sat on the curb beside her SUV, Evan wrapped in her arms, both of them breathing in short, uneven pulls as the shock finally loosened its grip. Rex lay a few feet away, calm and watchful, his head resting on his paws as if guarding the quiet itself. Luke stood nearby, speaking in low tones with an officer, his posture relaxed now, but never careless. When the officer finally left, Luke turned back to Sarah. "They'll be held," he said. "With the footage and the knife, they won't be walking away tonight." Sarah nodded, though her thoughts were already somewhere else. "And the others?" she asked. "The ones we haven't seen." Luke didn't pretend. This group wasn't small, but tonight mattered. It broke something they depended on. Silence. Sarah looked down at her purse, her hand tightening around the strap. Slowly, deliberately, she opened it. Her fingers brushed the familiar metal edge hidden in a small, inner pocket, Evan noticed. "That thing Dad gave you," he said softly. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Then she pulled out the flash drive and held it in her palm. It looked ordinary, forgettable, the kind of thing you could lose between couch cushions, and yet it had nearly cost them everything. Luke's gaze fixed on it. He didn't reach for it. He waited. "Thomas said to keep it safe," Sarah said. "He didn't tell me why, just that it mattered." Luke nodded. "It does." She met his eyes. "You knew him?" "Yes," Luke said. "We served together." The words settled gently, like a truth finally given a place to rest. Sarah felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, grief tangled with pride. "He believed people would do the right thing," Luke continued, "even when it cost them." Sarah thought of Donna Hayes standing her ground with a shaking phone, of Rex holding a line without crossing it, of a stranger who had stepped into the dark and refused to look away. "I want to do the right thing," she said. Luke extended his hand, not demanding, just offering. "Then we'll do it together." She placed the flash drive in his palm. Evan watched closely. "Dad would want that," he said. Luke closed his fingers around the drive and nodded once. "He would." A moment passed, then Rex rose and walked over to Evan, sitting neatly in front of him. Evan hesitated, then rested his small hand on the dog's head. Rex didn't move. He simply accepted the touch, solid and steady. "He's very gentle," Evan said. Luke smiled faintly. "He knows when to be." Sarah wiped her eyes, a soft laugh escaping through her tears. "He saved us." Luke shook his head. "He did what he was trained to do." "And you?" she asked. Luke looked away briefly, toward the darkened ramp where the police cars had gone. "I kept a promise." They stood there a little longer, the three of them and the dog, breathing in the aftermath. Eventually, Luke clipped the leash back onto Rex's harness. "I'll walk you up," he said. They rode the elevator in silence. When the doors opened on Sarah's floor, the hallway lights felt brighter than she remembered. Safer. At her door, Sarah turned. "What happens now?" Luke considered her for a moment. "Now you rest. You let the noise fade, and when you're ready, you tell the truth." She nodded. "I can do that." Evan hugged Rex one last time, careful and deliberate. "Goodbye," he said. "Thank you for listening." Rex's tail thumped once against the floor. Luke watched mother and son step inside their apartment. When the door closed, he stood there a moment longer, then turned back toward the stairs, Rex at his side. The garage below was quiet again, but it was no longer empty, because sometimes silence isn't the absence of sound, Sometimes it's the moment right before the truth finally speaks. So, if this story moved you, even just a little, let us know. Sometimes the quiet moments say the most. If you believe that silence should never protect cruelty, type 1 in the comments. If you believe loyalty and courage still matter, type 0. Your comment helps this story reach others who need it. And if you want to keep watching real stories like this, stories about courage, loyalty, and the moments that change lives, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. More stories are coming.